Situation in the part of Holland still occupied by the German troops had become critical. And when on April 10th, 1945, Churchill sent a cablegram to President Roosevelt, quoting in part, the plight of the Dutch population in occupied Holland is desperate. Between 2 and 3 million people are facing starvation. We believe that large numbers are dying daily. It turned out that General Blaskowitz, the German commander in occupied Holland, refused to surrender in spite of the hopeless position that the Germans were in. Blaskowitz even refused a truce unless he had direct orders from Berlin, which at that point in the war was having its own little problems, in that the Russians were on the outskirts dropping artillery shells in the middle of Berlin. But Blaskowitz was proffering he wanted word from Berlin before he signed a truce. Nevertheless, the 8th Air Force, under orders from General Eisenhower, began planning a massive food drop along with Bomber Command of the Royal Air Force in England. And negotiations continued through Swedish intermediaries with Blaskowitz. But some 300 B-17 flying fortresses were taken off combat, and they were modified with wooden platforms in the bomb bays to hold 90 cartons of the GI 10-in-1 rations. These were 51-pound boxes, and they were all neatly stacked on the wooden floors. Well, this went on, and by April 25th, the fortresses were ready. They had been modified. They had the food stacked in the bomb bays, and they were ready to go. There were delays, however, partly due to bad weather at the drop zones, and mostly due to the intransigence of the foolish Blaskowitz, who still hadn't heard from Berlin. So happened that Hitler and Eva were deep in the in the caves underneath Berlin, planning their suicides, and it didn't seem particularly important to them to answer General Blaskowitz. But exasperation built up, and the 8th Air Force commanders said, all right, we're going to fly no matter what on May 1, 1945. And in case there isn't a truce by then, we will fly in combat formation with full machine guns charged and ready to shoot. And you will go in at 500 feet over the coastal defenses of the German anti-aircraft gunners. This really didn't appeal to us as a particularly fair fight at 500 feet with machine guns versus 88 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. But those were the orders, and fly we did. And we flew in close formation for combat regulations. And we flew across a rather choppy weather system in close formation across the channel, with a bit of anxiety building up as we approached the coast of Holland. And we got close enough that we could see the anti-aircraft batteries and see that they were manned. And as we went over those batteries, the German gunners tracked us, swiveling around, and we could actually see their faces. But they didn't shoot. Not a shot was fired. Our collective sighs of relief at not being fired upon suddenly changed to gasps of disbelief and wonderment. Because in the unfolding area of Holland, the interior, just ahead of us, were throngs of people. People on the streets, people standing on the rooftops of tall apartment houses, even on their canal boats. And they were all waving flags. When we got close enough, we realized that the flags were not Dutch flags. They were American flags being waved by those valiant, crazy Dutch in the midst of their being surrounded by German occupation troops. The roar of the B-17 engines had trumpeted the arrival of the massive airdrop, and the Dutch, entirely ignoring their German occupiers, put on quite a welcome show, including hanging bed sheets from the upper story windows of the apartment houses. Bed sheets inscribed with "Thanks, Yanks," advertising the fact that they were glad to see the Germans' opponents coming in to the Netherlands. It was a scene never to be forgotten. But it quickly changed as we started to pass by because of the drama below, are at us 500 feet above. It was a dramatic shift from a celebration welcoming the Yanks, the Americans, to something different, in that it was a joint celebration. And the realization dawned that we were celebrating different things, but they both had to do with victory. The Dutch were celebrating having survived this welcoming without interference from the occupation troops, the Dutch were celebrating the fact that they were at last being freed from the tyranny of the occupation. And their audacity was what triggered that realization. They could now take control of their country after how many years? 4 or 5 years of occupation, and be free to run their lives and to do all the things that were normal once again. The Americans in the planes overhead had survived the crossing of the Dutch coast batteries of anti-aircraft guns and realized that this last combat mission really was over, that it was not a combat mission after all. It was a pretense. But the celebration was just as enthusiastic on the part of the Americans, because this last pretend combat mission was also the last mission ever flown by the mighty 8th Air Force. So what was a welcoming reception by the Dutch victory, and said, we're coming up on the initial point. The initial point, or IP, was where a mission turned on to what was usually the bomb run and headed in a straight, uninterrupted line and proceeded to follow in a straight line toward the drop zone just south of The Hague. So, in this unlined fortress had made itself into a non-threatening savior of the starving Dutch, an ungainly looking savior, but magnificent in its reconstruction and performance. So that was the day, May 1, when the most awesome swords of the air war over Europe, the weapons of the bombers, became the burdens of peace. And the swords of war were literally beaten in, were transformed into the plowshares of peace, of peace, of peace.
and down we roar to scorn the rainbow's sparkle. A toast to the host of men we boast, the army echoes. Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. And the boys, give her the gun, give her the gun.